Okay, welcome everybody out to Three Martini Solution Podcast, a special episode again for Under the Banner of Heaven, where we discuss episode 4. You know, with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial like off this week, instead of doing a regular podcast where we would talk about something like that, I think it's a good time to talk about just episode 4 of Under the Banner of Heaven. And I wrote down some notes. I have a lot of questions about this one. But let's go ahead and get started. What do you guys all think of the episode 4? Anybody? Please talk
Well,
amongst
if
yourselves.
anyone who's LDS stopped watching it. Oh,
Go.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was going to say, if episode 3 is what got anyone who's LDS to stop watching, episode 4 is what has me fully invested now. It's really took quite the turn.
Yeah, so what is it about episode 4 that really drew you in?
Well, I feel a little silly, but as my older brother, this will not surprise you at all. I didn't realize this was all based off of a true story. I knew it was based off of a book, but a book on it. I mean, it all rings true. I get that now, but that was a big, like, okay, the Laffertys are real Mormons. Of course, these assholes are. Like, a lot came together for me personally in that.
I would like to unpack
Like
all the reasons why you didn't know that this was based on a real story, but we only have an hour today.
Because I thought it was based off of a book, but so I just never put together that the book might be based off of a real story. You know,
Bishop Lowe.
Bishop Lowe, did you?
I have nothing but support and love for you, Bishop Lowe, in all the work you do.
It was a very upsetting episode for me.
Yeah.
Like watching that and watching it kind of, I don't know, took all of the thoughts I have, the negative thoughts about what religion, organized religion as a whole does and how it uses its power and stuff like that to try and manipulate people into thinking its way, and like put that out on full display. And it was very upsetting. Like I just, all of the negative things that I believe about religion kind of came up and showed. And when it was the president came in to talk to Officer Pyrie and was like, hey, you know, like they're good kids. Like they're just, come on, just let them go. Don't worry, I'll take care of them. You can trust me. I can't believe you'd want to let your eternal spirit go over some little nonsense. And then when he came back, he was like, this is not it's murder. Like we are not letting these people go because you say they're nice kids. We're doing a murder investigation.
Right.
Like I was glad he was able to stand up to the president that way, but like that right there was so much of my reason why I think religion has a negative impact on people, is that type of thing where they're trying to pull on those strings to get benefits to people that they shouldn't.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the questions I had, because I didn't look into it to know if this part of the TV series was based off something that really happened. Do you know, Casey? Did a stake president come in there and try to get custody of those 3 Lafferty brothers?
I've seen no indication of that. I mean, I know that Krakauer based most of his book off of just his discussions with Dan Lafferty. So I don't know that any of that would be known. And also because Pyrie is a like a made up character.
Right.
So I mean, for me, this episode felt the most foreign, as far as like so much of the Mormon stuff was familiar in the other episodes. Like this was, I think this took the worst stories I've ever heard of but never experienced and kind of gave them light. So that was, it's not that I don't believe that a stake president would do something like that, or certain stake presidents, but stake presidents that I've met, if there's like a murder investigation, they're just like,
yeah,
lose my number. Don't call me.
Right.
Lose the number.
You call me when that's over. Like,
right.
That was a little weird. I mean, I also thought it was interesting that the woman who met outside of the church and who was being sort of creepy manipulative Like, I don't think that would have ever happened right outside the church in front of the whole family. I think she may have had that conversation with Brenda privately, but that would have always, I think that would have been, that is more likely to have taken place woman to woman in a more private thing, not like you're the creepy emissary from the stake president to meet you at the doorway to the church type thing. I mean, dramatically, sure, it's great, but it makes for great theater. But it didn't strike very true to me as something like, a lot happens in the foyer of the church, but that's, I don't know that she would ever do that in front of Jeb.
They wouldn't have wanted so many witnesses. Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because
that's absolutely right.
Because that's something that when I watch, I turn to Emily, my wife, and ask, like, does that ring true to you? I mean, I don't think I would have been there for a discussion like that. And she said that she didn't feel like that one rang as true, that interaction. She's like, definitely somebody might approach you and like passive aggressively insinuate that you're doing something wrong or you should be doing something different, but not kind of the way that she did it. And I kind of was thinking along the same lines as you too, Casey, that some of the things that they were going through at the church, at least they were not my experiences. I think there are things that people might be afraid happens behind the scenes, as far as like the office of the president of the church getting involved in certain things. Maybe them telling a member of a bishopric, hey, it's okay to talk about this with the police, might be something that they would do. Just saying, hey, from our standpoint, we're not going to get involved in this, but them being involved in it, like to the extent that they were, I mean, maybe that happens. But I just don't have any experience of ever seeing that happen. But I do agree with Kyle in that I do think it's pointing out what's bad, or what could be potentially bad, about religion just generally, because, I don't think it's too foreign to assume that higher ups in any sort of organization might want to protect the organization wherever they can.
Right.
And certainly the through line, or at least towards the end of this episode, when the police chief comes back, whatnot, and kind of wants to put the kibosh on mentioning anything to do with the FLDS church, which I thought was interesting-ish. Like, I didn't understand why they wanted to not talk about the FLDS church, like in relationship to the murder. I mean, and I don't know if really back then people were asking about an FLDS connection. Do you have any insight to that, Casey?
Well, my understanding is that the Laffertys were not FLDS. Like, that's part of the problem, is they're linking that. And that's a Krakauer linkage, is to link them up like that. I mean, I read an article by a woman who was raised FLDS, and she's like, the first we ever heard of the Laffertys was when we heard the police talking about it, type thing. I mean, not that she can speak for all FLDS, but she's one with, but the other thing that was, so I think that, when they talk about fundies, just fundamentalist Mormons.
I was going to ask, is that a Utah term? I've never heard that before.
I don't know. I mean, that's just a broader term than, it's still a broader term than just FLDS, but either way, I don't know. But I mean, and that's where it was interesting. I mean, it was kind of weird. I mean, what I took that as when I saw that scene was, this is Black trying to reconcile Krakauer's book with the LDS Church's 3 like denouncements of the book that happened in the early 2000s, and kind of trying to speak to that a little bit. That's like, hey, we're at least going to show that, hey, they're different, and this is why they're different. That was part of the reason why they were one of the reasons they freaked out about Krakauer's book, right? But also about other things, because they have been trying for a very long time to distance themselves from, more fundamentalist practices of stuff, which is interesting, because that's actually the reason that many fundamentalist groups broke off in the first place in the 40s, which is when they started to, prosecute and like excommunicate people who were practicing polygamy, where these people that were practicing polygamy had, really felt strongly about it. We're like, how can you do this? You used to do this. So you are the ones who have fallen away. We're going to follow like the true doctrine, which, many religions go through schisms like this. And so And once they started really cracking down, as long as it was a wink, wink, nod, nod type thing, which did happen between like the turn of this, after the 1898 revelation about, the discontinued polygamy and stuff, there still were authorized polygamous marriages that took place. And so there was sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod, or else the people who in the know could do things like that. But then when they officially say absolutely not, no more, then they can be like, you have all lost your way. We're going to stay to the true type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Also, their portrayal of the tract by Joseph Smith.
Yeah, they muddied the water a little bit on that.
Yeah,
they didn't explain that as clear. And I went back because I'd heard of that publication before, and the way that they said it was printed by Joseph Smith.
Right.
And so I quickly looked up the source for all things truth, which is Wikipedia, and and it refreshed my recollection, as it were, about what was happening there, which was that it was a tract that was printed by Joseph Smith's printing press. He at the time denied that he had authorized it, and basically says if I had known what it was in it, I wouldn't have had it published, which seems kind of weird that you wouldn't know what I mean, it wasn't pressing print like today, right? You had to go through a bunch of effort to put that together to print it. So it seems a little skeptical. And then years later, there was other people involved that says, no, Joseph tapped that guy to write that thing for him, to float it out there to see how the members of the church would react to it. And when they reacted negatively to it, that's when he backed off. At least those are the two competing positions. I don't know if you have more. Yeah, Casey.
Well, I think he had to work it in because I think that was something that the Laffertys did look at, right? And it's one of those things that it's a historical document, but the origins and the sources and the discussion of it are murky enough that you could read it either way, right? The Laffertys can say, oh, yeah, Joseph Smith really knew and he really did want to do it. Like there's enough there to do that. But there's also enough room on the other side for people to say, nope, he denounced it. It's not that's not actually what he believed, blah, blah, blah. Like, and those things that are like that, right, are rich soil to plant all sorts of seeds, and you're going to get all sorts of different things from it. People are going to use it also. I mean, you might even put all scripture is like that in some ways, right? This has been around a lot longer than a tract from the 1800s, right? Because a lot of the scriptures, we don't know who wrote it exactly, right? The historians debate that back and forth and how much they wrote, whether somebody changed it later and things like that. It's like, that's how you interpret texts, years and centuries and millennia later is difficult. And so, I mean, that's just what we're seeing here, and they're going to use it to their own ends.
Yeah, I
thought a more powerful scene about it. I mean, I think they had to bring that in because I believe that tract was there present or whatever. But the more powerful scene was how they decided to stage the Emma Joseph talk discussion. Because when Emma gives her feelings about polygamy, and then the words that they give Joseph out of his mouth are the words that are in modern Latter-day Saint scripture, and they are cringe, to say, put it mildly. Like,
yeah. So, Kyle, when you saw that play out, what were your thoughts?
My first one was I paused it and asked Jessica, I'm like, are they trying to play this off like all of a sudden he's in the middle of an argument talking with his wife about wanting to marry more women? He's like, 1 second, God's going to talk real fast. Oh my God, God also thinks that I should in fact have lots of wives, and he's against you having multiple husbands. It's weird. It's not me. That is 100% God having that. Like I was,
He was a vessel.
yeah, like I was shocked that was like
right.
What was happening. I'm like, that seems so much like a TV show fake thing that you do when you're like trying to have an argument and you're like, I'm not going to win this. 1 second. Oh no, that wasn't me talking. That was the higher power. And he just said that. So
that you'll be destroyed.
Yeah,
right.
You'll be destroyed if you have multiple husbands.
I mean, it's got a pretty strong message for you.
I can have lots of wives. Like that was shocking to see that play out. Like
so that doesn't happen in your marriage.
People, it does. I mean, like I am the higher power in our marriage, so I don't have to pretend.
So you get revelation about it, like. No, you sell the office furniture. I'm not selling the office furniture. God said so.
And if you don't sell it, you will be destroyed. It's
you'll be
fine.
damned.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I say the staging of it, because my understanding from my own study and research is that's not exactly how it went down with the stage directions and stuff. However, because Joseph had already received that revelation, but he did send it to Emma through his brother.
Yeah,
because Hiram was also sort of against polygamy, right? But like that's an interesting way to have a discussion with your wife too, about like, hey, brother, you go talk to her.
So
she's gonna be super upset. If you could break that news to her, that would be great.
well, so he might, and I'm going off of memory here, but if I remember what the sequence was, and maybe and it's probably all wrong, but I'll just say it anyways, is that he had come to this idea, call it revelation if you want, that there should be plural marriage. He was already practicing it. He was already teaching it. There was lots of people he had already married people to. Emma was totally against it, and there was a discussion with at least Joseph Smith's brother Hiram and somebody else. They're sitting around talking about it and basically saying she's not on board. She's never going to get on board, and there was somebody said, well, why don't you just write down the revelation from God? And Hiram says, I'll bring it to her and convince her that this is from God and that she should get on board. And he's like, well, I don't think you know what you're getting into. I'm paraphrasing. And so he writes it down, takes it to Emma, and she says, you guys are all full of garbage. And then at some point later on, I don't think we have, as far as I know, there's not a good record of what happened after that. But sometime after that, after she rejects it, she says, okay to something, okay to it, a plural marriage, if not consummated or something. And then they go through this whole sham of him remarrying two different, maybe they were sisters, I don't remember, but remarrying somebody who he's already married, but doing it in front of Emma now to say, okay, now we're going to be doing it the right way under this. And so, yeah, I think that they had the words that are there were real words, but it wasn't, I don't think we know if that's exactly how it happened. I'm guessing maybe not.
It's good for the show, but I can't imagine that was like, yeah, I don't know.
I can't imagine.
Right.
I would imagine she would have gone over and just kicked him at that point. Like if it was...
Well, there are, this is less important to me than exactly what happened because I wasn't there. But it's like, and I think that's what the series and stuff are getting at is how, as a group or a community, do you deal with things like this that are at best complicated and at worst awful in your history, right? How do you deal with that? How do you grapple with the history of it? Do you try to cover it up? Do you try to make it a different story? Do you try to change the facts? Do you try to, everyone's going to spin the facts for sure. How do you do that? Like there are people, that there are some stories that, Emma only accepted it for a few weeks and then she made Joseph burn that revelation or whatever. Some people, like there are some modern Mormons who feel that Joseph had burned it and then repudiated it, right? And that's, there are some current fringe Mormons who are like, hey, Brigham Young had Joseph killed because Joseph like repudiated polygamy, and so Brigham Young had him. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories, and here I am like gonna now broadcast them on the internet, which is great. But how, what do you do with that, right? What do you do with the fact that now still for modern, mainstream Mormons, if you want to call them that, those words that Joseph spoke to Emma in that scene are still in a book that is scripture for modern LDS people, right? What do you do with those things? What do you do with the fact that there's this revelation from God through a husband saying, hey, if you don't do this, that we no longer practice, you'll be destroyed. Like, what do you do with all that? That's some stuff to process, right? And it's like,
well, when Kyle asked me that question as we were watching it, I was like, really, I have very little memory of polygamy ever being spoken about at church. It only came up if somebody had the balls to ask about it, which was this one. Definitely had some questions about it, right? So the response that I remember receiving as a girl in the church was very similar to the explanation of how important the priesthood is and why women can't hold the priesthood and men can. It's because it is so burdensome, or it's such a huge responsibility. We couldn't even, men are doing us a favor by not putting that weight on our shoulders. The same was kind of explained why Joseph did polygamy, is because clearly the ratio of women to men was so vast that all of these single ladies had no one to take care of them. So like, here comes the men to come and like take them in and give them shelter and food and save them, essentially. And they definitely described it as like, those were different times. And like, you know, we didn't have the amenities and the, you know, the access to things you have now. And so women were really very dependent on men for that. So that's my memory of how it was explained to me as a child growing up in the church. But my other source here, which is a really close runner-up to my housewife shows, would be Sister Wives. Shout out to TLC, one of the best programs put together in the last decade. And I will definitely go toe-to-toe with you on that argument. If you've not given it any time, you've got to listen to these ladies. And Cody, oh my God, I don't want to derail this podcast, guys, but when you hear them talk about, like, one of their most recent episodes, they go back to Utah, which is very dangerous, right? Because they're going to be arrested at any moment, talking to another polygamous family, current today, and how they're fighting law in Utah still to have it legal. And hearing like that discussion, also very, very eye-opening to what they believe, that it is the core truth of the church and that they are the only current Latter Days living the true gospel. So it's a pretty strong belief system there. That's my 2 cents. Sorry, it's a lot to unpack.
Well, and that, you know, what Jessica said about what she remembers, the explanation for polygamy was the same. That's what I heard as well. Like that it was necessary. It was a necessary thing at the time. Then it became less necessary, and so it was done away with. And it was necessary for the reasons that Jessica said, that there was so many men that were killed. And they needed.
Oh, is that the explanation of the ratio?
The ratio. Like, there's so many men killed. I don't know when or where.
All these ladies are just in Utah pining away. What's the guy to do?
And the laws at the time didn't allow women to own property, and so they needed to get married to somebody. And what are we going to do? And you know, and they weren't really sexual unless they were. And then that was okay.
Right. Unless they were 12, and then, you know.
And the times were different, even though they weren't that different. Like, I don't think, like, if I remember correctly, there was never a point in time where there was a lot of, you know, 30, 40, 50-year-old men marrying 14-year-old girls, even back then. I think that was
doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Misnomer. Yeah.
I don't know. That's the thing.
We weren't there. We weren't there. How do we know?
Right. I do know that the practice of having like people sealed to you and stuff was, so for the non-Mormons in the room, sealing is another word for marriage. And so one of the things, the ways that they talked about it back in Nauvoo, to keep it separate and secret from the great unwashed, is they talked about spiritual wifery. That some people talk about that because it was a sort of common practice. There, you know, Mormons did not invent this. So there were a few people doing things like that. And so, but then they started calling it celestial marriage or, you know, spirit, whatever. So they separated it from civil or like regular, you know, civil marriage. So that was sort of separate, which is how you get around some of the bumps in the road for that too. And so then the way that I was first taught about it was that, well, you would have a first wife, but then you'd have other women sealed to you. But that's all that happened was like a ceremony that you're sealed, and like nothing else happened, right? Because there was no sex. That, that's the thing. But whether or not that's actually true or not, well, your mileage can vary on that one. But now the point that I'm getting to is, so my great grandfather, here we go. He went on a mission somewhere, and I guess while he was gone, he was married when he left on his mission, had a woman sealed to him. What that meant, I don't know, but he did not tell my great grandmother until he got home or something. And so for the rest of his life, he lived in his side of the house and she lived on her side of the house. He would feed him and he was allowed to be there, but he was not allowed to cross the threshold into her side of the house. And
Wow.
so,
I love her.
Explains some of my family to this day, but
I have a question about how like the like temple marriage where you get sealed, right? That's if you get married in the temple, that is where it's the like for eternity.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you get a temple marriage, divorced, and then remarried, it's still your first wife that will be yours in eternity, in the whatever the afterlife is.
Oh, now you're asking complicated questions.
But not like that's
Ryan, I'll let you tell this one.
Yeah. So again, the answer depends. The great refrain from all attorneys. It depends.
Should I put that on the shelf?
Yeah, you could put that on
But in
the
the
shelf.
show-
It's not for you to worry about. So the way it I believe technically works is you're correct. That is your first wife. You are sealed. And if you are a man and you get married again, you could be sealed to another woman. So you would have more than one wife in the life to come, even after the earthly divorce does not do away with the eternal sealing.
Right.
And so if you're a man, you could be sealed to multiple women. I think that the practice in this day and age has evolved a little bit, because I think in years past, you go back a few decades.
Well, they say it in the show, right? That like the modern day prophets still believe that that practice will exist in heaven.
Right. So,
right? Yes.
Okay. Casey really wants to talk. Go ahead, Casey, because I was just going to explain. I think what happened in the past is if you got divorced and you got resealed, they used to be like, that's fine. Now I think there's probably more of a practice of getting unsealed and resealed, but there are still many men living now who are sealed to more than one wife. And
because I would have to imagine that could present an issue of like, unbeknownst to you, the woman that you are going to be married to and get sealed was previous. Like if she got a divorce,
well,
like,
so then there's
you split that baby.
so
and
she can't be sealed.
half?
She can't be sealed to more than one man. And so when a woman gets divorced and she wants to get resealed, she has to go through a process of petitioning the president of the church to ask for a temple annulment, divorce, whatever they want to call it, an unsealing. And so it's more onerous for a woman who's getting remarried in the temple than a man. Casey, you had your hand up. Did you?
I did. So, because there's been recent changes. So if anyone who wants to go digging through all of this, the General Handbook of Instructions is online and available to anyone who wants to go and spend your time looking through that. It changes a lot, and it's changed a lot in the past couple of years. So the most previous recent practice was if a couple being married in the temple gets a civil divorce. They get a civil divorce. They got a civil divorce. This is past tense. So they got a civil divorce, and when they got that civil divorce, nothing would happen to that temple sealing, because the explanation was those blessings that get sealed are so important that we're not going to undo those until you get remarried. So upon whoever gets remarried first will then cause that sealing to be broken. Well, sort of. If the guy would get remarried, then the guy could be sealed to more than one woman. If the woman got remarried, she would need to have that first one annulled, or sometimes it wouldn't happen. And so then people were told, it'll all get worked out in the next life sort of thing. However, that has now changed.
Oh,
They
good.
no longer perform in the temple sealings to people who, like, their spouse is just deceased. So, like, this would often happen, like one spouse would get deceased and you get married to another one, and you could be like, a man could be sealed to more. They no longer do that. That second marriage would, if they were sealed to the first one, if they didn't have the sealing annulled or whatever, that second marriage will now be just for time only, not for time and eternity, like Kyle was talking about. So it has changed a little bit. They only perform second marriages for time only. But again, if you do get divorced civilly and both people are still living,
So if you're
then
a
you
woman,
can.
so let me, and
Right. That's our grandparents' story.
right. Yeah. No, yeah. And
That's exactly what happened with our grandparents.
right. They,
And so they got a divorce,
Mhm.
and my grandpa remarried a widow. So she was sealed to her first husband, but he passed. And so they did not have a temple marriage. They had a civil wedding, and I'm sure they did something in the temple.
They got married in the temple in a civil.
But that's exactly what happened in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that was a long time ago. But they weren't seeking to get sealed to each other. But let me ask you this, Casey. So if there's a woman who's never been married, never been sealed to anybody, she wants to get married and sealed to a guy whose wife he's either divorced from or his wife has died, and he's sealed to that first wife, she can't get sealed to him.
If his wife has died and he's sealed in the temple,
Mm-hmm.
then no, it's only time only.
Okay. So she's SOL. So somebody's still getting screwed in this, and it sounds like it's the woman.
Always.
Right? No, am I wrong? I'm okay. Casey doesn't want to comment. I'm right.
You already know how I feel. There's no comment to be made.
And it's
earlier, but like the patriarchal explanations for all of these things, like, if you say, oh, it's because it's so hard, blah 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 blah, it's still philanthropic misogyny. Like, really? And it's just an excuse to do that. And it's just it's very
well.
Adults can choose whatever they would like. However, systems can be oppressive and sexist, and I reserve the right to call out whatever system I would like as a sexist system.
Well,
the one thing that
I've also heard too, like that there's no mental illness in heaven. So if you had a split, right, and here on earth because your wife was crazy as shit, don't worry, she'll be fine up in heaven. Heavenly Father's going to fix what's ever wrong with our brain. So like, that's, I swear to you, that has been how it's been explained to me. Because I was
that's been a source of comfort for you, Jessica.
I mean, talk about like getting screwed in the long run. And oh, no. Those, like you said, everything gets solved in, the afterlife.
Well, the one thing that is good about, I think that it's good that they made that change, even though it's not perfect, because a very common story that I heard over the years was people who really were stressed and anxious about the fact of like, well, we would like to get remarried. We don't want to stay sealed to that first person. We want it all broken. And they're waiting on a bureaucracy in Salt Lake City churning stuff out. And sometimes they can't get married when they want to get married, and they can't do the things they want to do. So it sounds like at least there's a mechanism now that makes it hopefully quicker. I don't know if it really does, but it used to be much more cumbersome to get that done. So, all right. Well, I have some questions. Does anybody else have any other questions or any other things about the episode that stood out?
I wanted to ask you guys how did it come across to you going back to that Emma Joseph Smith cutscene where when he, like, before he has his revelation and they're just talking and he kind of says to her, like, are you telling me that you're not a good Mormon? You're not going to be practicing? And she's like, I was there when you found the plates. I transcribed every single word, and you're going to tell me that how did that play to you guys as Mormons or former people of the church?
So personally, that was kind of how I saw Emma. Like, she was his first champion. like real, well, not the first, but one of his first big champions. She really facilitated a lot of things happening. I always felt she probably didn't get the credit that she deserved in church
The
history.
first sister of the church kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think he was not a perfect leader by any stretch, and I think she held a lot of stuff together. And because she didn't, there was a rift between her and Brigham Young, is my understanding, and so she didn't follow him out there. I, if I remember correctly, there was even an understanding with Brigham that one day one of Joseph's sons was going to be the next prophet of the church, and he was just kind of a placeholder. But there was a rift having to do with who owned or who can control the assets of the church after Joseph died. She doesn't go back west with him; she stays there, and so kind of got from Brigham Young on, kind of got didn't get the credit that she was due within the history of the church. So that was kind of my personal feelings. And so when she says all that stuff, it's like, to me, it was like, yeah, like she was there. She was in the thick of things. And, you know, she was the last one that somebody should be calling out for not being fully on board. She was the first one that was really on board. I don't know. How about you, Casey?
Yeah, I mean, Emma was very smart. I think Emma loved Joseph. I mean, that's clear because she stuck with him. Like, she stuck with him through all of it. Like, she did. And she has never struck me as a person who would stick with someone because she felt stuck. Like, she always felt, to me, like all the things that I have read, that she chose what she wanted. I mean, and she was a very strong person. I mean, Joseph was not as good with funds, and she was much better with funds. And so she helped with like all the finances and stuff. Like, she helped welcome so many people to Nauvoo in Illinois. They were getting so many converts showing up. And one of the things is, they wanted to provide, like, the Relief Society, the women's organization that she started. They were, trying to provide all these families, like, with blankets and stuff. And like, a lot of the men would be like, well, that's a lot to ask. And she's like, nope, we got it. And so, and they would just go and do it. And she was like that. And going toe to toe with Brigham Young, few people can do that, or few people were able to do that. And she did, because she was worried about her family and whatever. And that's why she stayed where she did. And, and so Brigham then proceeded to have like a huge public, like, smear campaign forever about Emma. I mean, Emma was disavowing polygamy. And so that was part of it. So there's a doctrinal rift there. But I mean, he talked bad about Emma in Utah. So like, for the longest time, until about the 80s, I'm saying 1980s, Emma was awful and she was terrible. And it wasn't until historians started doing some really good work that Emma's image was sort of rehabilitated and got out from under the Brigham Young smear campaign and stuff. Like, he did not deal well with people who went a different way than him. And so, which to me speaks a lot to her character, that she stuck with Joseph Smith, even, when he did all, even when Brigham Young got involved in leadership and stuff like that. And then she was able to say, Brigham, sorry. I mean, Brigham offered to marry her and stuff, you can be one of my wives. And she's like, all that stuff. So I don't know, I give her a lot of credit. And Joseph also stuck by her. Like, he could have been like many other men in similar situations, that the minute your current wife, stops being obedient, whatever, right?
Yeah.
You cast her aside type thing. And he definitely had the power within that community because he was sort of in charge, but he never did. He loved Emma. And so I think that's a really fascinating story. And I don't know if we have really, understood the depths of that relationship, because they did stick with each other through some really complicated, very, very difficult stuff that was going on. Because Nauvoo was a hot period. There was a lot of controversy and fighting and infighting and stuff too, from both the outside and the inside. So,
All right. Yeah.
That's all I got.
That's it. That's all. Jessica, was there anything that you any other things that stood out to you about the episode, or any questions you had? I'm asking you guys because I have a list.
I think you can jump into yours. And I don't know how much, like, as she was talking about transcribing the golden plates with him, like, are people, like, is trying to find those a thing? Like, does anyone, is there, like, whether it's crazy conspiracy, like, but that's the one thing is, like, have these ever, like,
No.
when did they disappear? And has anyone ever, like, do Mormons think they're hidden in somewhere, like, I don't know.
Because
that would really clear up a lot of shit if we could just find those. You know what I mean, right?
But I've heard the story where he was transcribing from a set of the plates, and then someone did not believe that he was transcribing the word of God, and so took that person to show them the plates, and that broke the pact or whatever God had with him, and so those disappeared, and then he had to find a second set of plates because God told him that only he was allowed to look at them and no one else could set eyes. And so if anyone tries, or he tried to do it.
That's why I thought, like, did Emma see him and that's why she was such a ride or die? I don't know.
Well,
and that goes back to my question. Sorry. Originally, though, why I asked you about that was it felt like to me when she was saying that, like, I was there when you transcribed him, like, hey, buddy, I was here when you started this whole charade. Like, I was in on it. You can't make up a story that tells me I'm not being a good person. I created this story with you. Mm-hmm. Like, it felt very much like a power play of, like, we started this together. Mm-hmm. You can't start spinning it to where you take me out of it. I was there when it started, and whether she believed that happened or whatever it was, she's kind of saying, like, I was there at the beginning. I was just as much a part of this story as you. And that's how it came across to me.
Yeah. And I agree with that interpretation of it. That was essentially my interpretation as well. And I think that there's historical backing for that. What I think you're referring to is there was the story in the church that, one of his financial backers, and I'm just not good with the names, Martin Harris, he was a kind of Joseph's financial backer. He was a believer from the get-go. He had a little bit of money. He wasn't super wealthy, but he had some money that he could spend on this. But his wife was always skeptical. And so he had gone to, I believe, Pennsylvania to kind of be with Joseph and help him along to get the book translated. And his wife was giving him a hard time, and he says, well, Joseph, if I could just take some of, not the plates themselves, but some of your revelations to her and show them to her, then I'm sure she'll be on board. So Joseph says, I didn't really think it was a good idea, but I said, okay. So he goes up, shows them to the wife. The wife, as the story goes, I believe, throws them into the fire and burns them, says this isn't revelation or whatever. And then Joseph goes back and, or maybe she says something along the lines, well, if he's a real prophet, he can retranslate all this kind of stuff. And that was the only copy because, everything's handwritten back then. And instead, and then Joseph really sees a revelation that, no, you don't get that part anymore. You've lost it. And then the book, as luck would have it, there was a second set of plates wrapped up within the plates themselves. And in the second set of plates, it basically repeats the same story, but from a different point of view. And so we still have the story, but just not as it was. The original idea behind the Book of Mormon is there is a secular story and a religious story going parallel to each other, and different people are writing different things. Tell me when I'm screwing it up too much, Casey. But and so I can't remember which one. A little. Am I screwing it up a little? All right. Casey has a better explanation.
Well, just some of the facts. Like, Martin was visiting Joseph down in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and took the manuscript back home because he wanted to show his wife, and he was showing it to a number of people, and his wife let him lock it in this bureau. But then when he went to get it one day, it was gone, and so they disappeared. Whether or not she threw them in the fire, no one ever really quite knows. And anyway, but yeah, so they disappeared out of the bureau. So it was, who knows who's telling the full story or not, but she was. It happened as Ryan said it because he's talked to Why? So
I'm going to cut out everything Casey just said. I'm just going to leave in Ryan's story was right.
Right. There you go. Perfect.
Well, so just getting back to what Kyle was saying, I don't think he ever showed the plates. He wasn't showing the plates to anybody. It was a transcript. And there are the statements of the witnesses of the plates, which probably we could spend another 2 hours talking about that, because I don't think it's as black and white as, yes, we saw the plates. I mean, that's what the words say, but historically may not stand up so much. And even some of the people who signed on to that told other stories that explained something that might seem a little different, but that's neither here or there. We're not here to talk about the Book of Mormon.
Yes, and I'm going to let you go to your list of questions. I just made an interesting connection. I feel like one of the biggest contributions the church has given the world is genealogy, right? Like that going back and like finding history, kind of, even giving Emma credit where credit's due and going back and rewriting that, even if it goes against what some of the early prophets of the church said. Like there is definitely, this expands outside of the church, right? And are they overcompensating? Like, is it because they have to rely so much on just faith alone that these existed, that they're like going to be the best historians in the world in every other means? Does anyone see what I'm saying? Like, because they literally, like, this is legit genealogy they put together. Is that to say, like, look, we're smart enough to really know and take our word for it, like, even though it's completely faith-based that they ever existed.
I've never felt like that's why they're so into genealogy, is just over to compensate for the lack of evidence of the Book of Mormon, like physical evidence of the Book of Mormon. I think my always impression is that it has more to do with like just tying into old bloodlines that go back to Christ. And
yeah, I agree with that. I imagine other religions were like, if you've read the Bible, like there are books of the Bible that are just lists of families and parents and like records of tax, all that kind of stuff that no one 2,000 years later would care about. But at the time, it's very important to be able to say like, no, my father's father's father was like, I've got this lineage. I am a true Christian, or I'm a true Mormon, or I'm a true, and it's just a modern day thing where Jews and Christians and Muslims have done this. It was just thousands of years ago when it wasn't as accurate or like a known thing.
Right. And yeah, I think religion just generally likes those sorts of things, because a lot of there's a certain point in time where even the churches, or the LDS churches, what is it? Genealogy. Once if you could hit back to one of these old Catholic lines, the Catholic Church was really good at keeping track of records of stuff and going back and back and back. So it's a continuation, I think, just of what religions have done forever.
Okay.
So
all right, go ahead, get to your list.
Can we get to my list? So I just, well, some of them are, we've kind of touched on already. Like one of my first big questions was the bleeding together of the church getting involved in really secular things, business things. When they, the banker says, the president of the church's office called me and told me that told me all about what you're doing and I could talk about it. I could see something like that happening, but when the stake president comes in and says, turn these guys over to me, I'm like, that doesn't just ring true. From what I've seen, the church has always tried to keep a good separation. But I could be wrong. People can have different experiences. I thought maybe some of the tone of particularly this episode is...
I think what rings true in that for me is sometimes they freeze with.
Yeah, you froze a little
Can
bit.
you guys, did we freeze on you?
Just for a second, yeah.
Okay. But like the knowing what he talked to his bishop about, and like starting to like pull, obviously that was for the show's effect. And I do think like when men take on the calling of being a bishop, I think that is something that's very important to them. And certainly having men in my life that were within that role, seeing that like they're not gossiping, but women in the church, like, you know, everything about everybody. It's like that small town, like, and that was rampant. And even still to this day, I'll have to like, I don't want to call anybody out, but be like, I'm just not interested in hearing any of that. No, I don't remember somebody from 25 years ago.
I have no idea.
Nor do I care.
For the
what their
record, I don't
daughter
know
is
who
up to
she's
right now.
talking
I just
about.
don't.
I don't know who
care.
Jessica's talking about. For the record.
But so I'm saying, like, I do think in like in certain roles, like what you share in confidence, but like we all have some level of like confidentiality related to our professions that you learn, like what confidentiality. I mean, there's HIPAA law and lots of things that FERPA law if you're an educator, so that, you know, we learn what's going to be appropriate and what's not. And from the lady side, in my experience, like that there was nothing you could share in confidence.
Right.
That wasn't going to be like,
yeah, well, so, and that's part of the thing
known
that
across your wall.
I think kind of rings true is when they talked about, that's why I said, I could see the office from the, Salt Lake City calling a bishop or a first counselor, second counselor, whatever that guy was, and saying it's okay to talk with the police about that because you are told, I don't know if there's a big legal backing for it, but this kind of privilege that you might have to keep certain information confidential as a clergy member. So if somebody's in there counseling with you and you say, well, I don't want to talk about that. It was said to me in privacy. There's certain expectations. There could be an expectations of privacy. And so you might not be as forthcoming with a police officer or something if you think there's a conflict involving that sort of thing. And so while it's not all clear black and white and that kind of stuff, that I was like, okay, that's within the realm of what I can see happening. Moving on though, one of the things I saw that I thought was more pronounced in this one. So they're talking about these anti-government groups and they're really showing the one brother, he's out on his campaign to be sheriff and this kind of stuff. And I was just wondering, because I think that the show generally tries to draw some comparisons to what was happening in the 80s to what happens today, at least inside the church, and maybe trying to make comment on some of the things happening today by showing it in the past, and so some of that stuff felt very fresh. Some of the kind of the commentary on it. I don't know if you guys felt the same.
Well, if you think though, the 80s were, trying to think back how it felt growing up in Utah in the 80s. I mean, this is the heyday of some like a real tack to the right for the church in many ways, and like a very high distrust of government. I mean, the prophet of the church who, right after Kimball, Ezra Taft Benson has some pretty interesting ties to incredibly conservative,
organizations, the Birch Society.
Sure. I mean, the John Birch Society, he was going to campaign for the presidency as an apostle with George Wallace. Check your Wikipedia if you want to know who George Wallace is, if that doesn't immediately give you some cringe vibes. I mean, he did that twice, right? And so, and Benson he served in a U.S. cabinet position, Secretary of Agriculture. And he, with Eisenhower, he was very, very conservative, very anti-communist. And so in his ideas about the role of government is not too many steps different, if more than, I would say fewer than 3 steps away from, the anti-tax position that the Laffertys had, at least initially as far as what we've seen so far. Right. That the best government is small, that, all those, those are Western libertarianism is alive and well today, and and Mormons definitely have adopted or absorbed some of that from that time period. Some of it through leadership, like it was an intentional push to the right from certain leaders of the church, because for a long time Mormons voted Democrat earlier because we had certain ideas, and we don't have to get into Mormon politics, but with Heber J. Grant and Ezra Taft Benson, they pushed them to the right for some of these things. So some of those ideas, it wasn't too much of a stretch for the Laffertys to jump from mainstream Mormons going to church every week, right, to then all of a sudden wanting to have a cabin in the woods and stop paying licensing fees type stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, no, good explanation, because I think you're probably right. After listening to you, I think you're probably right. They don't have to draw too much comparisons to what's going on
Can you
now.
send me that recording? Can you send me a recording?
Just that clip?
After listening to Casey, I think you're right.
I might have to replay that. I'm not sure I've heard that before.
That is not true.
Yeah.
This is the kind of abuse I take on a regular basis off the pod. He doesn't do it on the podcast, but I get constantly abused by Casey.
Right.
This is the only forum where I have a fighting chance.
Yep, that's, like I said, send me the recording, please.
All right.
Hilarious.
So the one of the other things and there was two scenes that I was like, for the first time, I'm like, well, maybe not the first time, but I'm like, oh, I think the filmmakers or the TV, whatever, they screwed up. I don't think we had a good foundation for when Ron is in the jail with his brothers and Dan, and it seems like Ron all of a sudden is going to take control of the family. And then the scene where he goes to the dad's house, they're in the basement, and he tries to say, well, we should be following the law under the 12th article of faith. And then they're like, well, then Dan changes his mind. I know at some point towards the end of that, they try to draw the timeline together to say, okay, because at first they're telling us these things and we don't know when this is happening and kind of how it affects other things going on in the show. And then they're like, oh, the timeline is this happened before this happened. And now we think Ron is just as big of an anti-taxer as Dan. But when they showed those things, and even when they try to tie it up in the end, there's still not a scene there that shows a good reason for Ron to have ever changed his mind about any of this. Like I'm still left thinking, why did he? I understand that his business is struggling. I understand his business isn't doing as well as it can because his brother's crazy. But for him to make such a large leap like that, I don't see a natural flow that way. How about you guys?
I agree. I was very lost. And even when Detective Pyrie at the end throws in, like, when was this written, to like put two and two together that Diana's in some serious trouble, and it was before or after the parade. Like, yes, I'm trying to put together some kind of timeline to make sense of all of it. And I think the reason I was able to follow any of that was because I think it was on one of the podcasts, or you had said Ron's their head dude. Like there was like little nuggets, like when Ron's mom comes to the shed after Dan is picked by the father to run things when they're on their senior mission, and his mom is like, trust me, it's really you, just give it time. So like looking back, there's some of those indicators, but Ron seemed like the only level-headed like guy in the family, and that what right. So I don't know, clearly he has a huge clash with his father, and his father is the one that doesn't have more of the like radical or extreme ideas. So maybe it's just to be in full defiance of his father even further. Who knows?
The jail scene comes before like the basement scene, right? And that's it. Like that seemed like, I agree with, like, it's such a wish-washy.
You guys froze up. Wishy-washy is the correct term, though.
The argument to make for him to then be like, yeah, if they brought, then I'm here for it. I agree. Like, I was like, what? that's the weakest kind of argument to give to him. Flip sides completely to something different. Like that was very shocking.
Yeah, I think they're missing a scene
Sweet
there.
little Alan. Like I can see us being in full control, but do I really have to marry someone else? If you want to get to the celestial kingdom, you do, Alan. Like,
Come on, Alan.
It's like, talk about really build Alan's character.
Well,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I agree with you, Ryan and Kyle. Like, I think what they're trying to do is I think they're trying to set up that chiropractor brother is always in charge because he is the zealot leader and he manipulates people around him because that's his tendency. The way that he does it, and I think where they mix that up, is contractor brother, right? They don't explain well how contractor brother gets sucked in because he's going to participate in the murders later. So, and I think what they're trying to do is, right, he's going to try and set up that his business was a little shaky. His wife wrote a letter because she's like, I'm concerned about my more mainstream husband getting involved with his wackadoodle brothers. And it's because, but she writes that letter, which causes him to perhaps lose the loan, which puts him even more on the financial straits. And then she's going to leave him, right? She's going to divorce. They haven't let that out yet, but she divorces him a little bit before this. And I think then Ron, the chiropractor brother, is going to pounce on that and manipulate him to bring him more closely into the fold by saying, oh, you're really the leader. But he's going to do like his dad does, right? You're really the leader as long as you're doing what I tell you to do.
Right.
And I
you're
think
the leader because I
they were inartful. The editing was not helpful.
Right. So my thoughts at the time were, well, yeah, they're missing a scene where Ron is looking in the mirror and saying, maybe I need to go this other way. And maybe that scene is yet to come. So I thought maybe like, okay, maybe they're going to show that scene, but they're not showing it in this episode, but they really should have showed it in this episode because we're just saying this seems unrealistic at this point. But the other point that I thought too of is because Casey's always said, the book was written from interviews with Dan, right? And so I'm like, maybe they don't have information for that scene, but I'm like, if I'm making a movie or a TV series for entertainment purposes, I know that that's a hole that I need to fill. And they should have had in this episode, I think, a scene to really explain, maybe as just before credits roll, the scene, X number of months ago or years ago, where Ron has this personal struggle where he decides it's time to give up this life on his own and go back to the family and be the leader of a crazy anti-tax family. But we just haven't.
Yeah, because in the basement, it definitely seems like his company is doing much worse than we were ever led to believe before that. Mm-hmm. Like if we had seen like Past Due or Last Note, like something to show that he's in more financial dire straits than we've been led to believe.
Yeah, but it just seems at that point that
part of the problem, I wanted to get the timeline correct. Part of the problem with understanding Ron's side of the story was because these are such heinous murders and stuff, they had to undergo competency hearings, and Ron tried to die by suicide while he was in the Utah County Jail, and his attempt to die by suicide was unsuccessful, but it resulted in brain damage to him. And so that's why there's a competency issue, and there always has been. So before he was ever really able to give his side of the story, discuss that or whatever, he had suffered a lot of damage or brain damage and things. And then he actually died in prison later. So he's unable to tell his side of the story or whatever. So, Dan, what a reliable narrator to give us all the information of what really went down. So,
well,
and then of course, love this. Dan represented himself during his trial. So of course he did.
Of course he did. Shifting gears, unless people have something more they want to talk about it, I was just going to ask, so throughout this whole thing, like, Alan is saying I saw some men in beards, but it seemed like in every episode where he mentions the men in beards, it's almost, he doesn't look like he's telling the full truth. And I think, Detective Pyrie and Taba both don't believe he's telling the full truth about that. And in this one, when they talk about, well, it could be these FLDS people, and he says, well, if it could be, but what Alan says isn't very convincing. I just don't know why he's not saying it could be my brothers. Right. And I don't know if the producers there are trying to say, no, this could be a big reveal later on. But at this point, like, we all know it's his brothers. Like, that's been known for a while. Why isn't that's not going to be a big reveal? Just say, yeah, I think these two bearded men could be my brothers because they're batshit crazy and they have big long beards and they would kill my wife. Like, it just doesn't seem that. I don't know why they're doing that.
It doesn't play like it's a true story. It plays like it is a movie, like an M. Night Shyamalan twist where the big beards are always the brother. And then at the end, you're like, oh, but it wasn't my brother. I got you thinking it was that. But it's a true story. You don't need that kind of like twist ending. I agree with you. I think it is unnecessary to keep talking about the bearded men when the only people you ever see with the beards are his brothers. And it's like every time he talks about that, you're like, it is strange.
Or the bearded dude in the woods at the very end of the episode.
Right.
Like, okay, that's a stretch. Clearly this guy is just hunting him some jackrabbits. He's gonna lead you into safety. But they really made that police officer so stupid. You really did feel like you were transported into the beginning of a horror movie.
Well, I thought they were doing something interesting actually with the brothers. And I don't know if this is purposeful. I'm just reading too much into it. But like Alan, who is the one who's furthest removed from the crazy anti-government stuff, is maybe his hair is a little long, but not super long. No beard. Like, he's been in jail for like a month and he has no stubble at all. And then you have the brother Robin, right? And he has maybe a beard of my length. And, his hair is a little bit longer, a little bit more scraggly. And then you have the crazy brother Sam, who has like Kyle's beard. So he's like a nut job and long, crazy hair. And so I don't know if they were like meaning to show, okay, here are three different brothers on three different parts of the spectrum to get to crazy. Mm-hmm. And we haven't seen the other two brothers who are murderers. Gandalf looking guys. So I don't know what, but I just noticed that and I'm like, I wonder if they did that on purpose. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Well, everybody, is there anything else that you want to comment on or have any questions about this episode before we wrap it up?
I know you guys have already told me how many are left? 6 or 7?
Three more left.
There's
7 episodes total.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 7 episodes total. Yeah.
I
can't believe I haven't come across this in one of my true crime documentaries. I mean, my mind's still blown, but I mean,
well, probably because it's not a documentary, right? Because I think Kyle's right. It's not even presented like a documentary.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Really.
Well, Jessica's referred to the fact that she didn't know that these were based on a real story.
Right. Yes. All of my. Yeah,
it's going to be hard to explain around that one, Casey. You're an amazing attorney. I think this one's going to be a stretch for you.
Jessica, I'm with you.
Yeah, at least I'm honest, you guys. At least I bring my authenticity to the table.
Indeed.
All right, everybody.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your weekend.
All right. Thanks.
Excited for next episode.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.